Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. We will begin today, as always, with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrasts, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us, and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. This morning, we're going to talk about a new way to pray. And parts of it I have shared with you before, but as always, I snuck in a few new little insights of things that I now believe, because as we know, our thoughts are always evolving. But this is what I personally needed to hear today. So I'm preaching to myself and just letting you listen in, okay? So let's begin with the quotes. The first one: when you plant seeds in the garden, you don't dig them up every day to see if they have sprouted yet. You simply water them and clear away the weeds. You know that the seeds will grow in time. Similarly, just do your daily practice and cultivate a kind heart. Abandon impatience and instead be content creating the causes for goodness. The results will come when they're ready. All right, that was a good one. Next, prayer doesn't change things, it changes us. The emotion that can break your heart is sometimes the very one that heals it. Lastly, your emotions make you human. Even the unpleasant ones have a purpose. Don't lock them away. If you ignore them, they just get louder and angrier. All right, so the quotes today are a mixture of several different topics. One is emotion, one is balance, and one is prayer. And we're going to talk about all three of those topics today and how they relate to each other. Humans are extremely emotional creatures. And as we've talked about before, emotions are neither inherently good or bad. Emotions are signals that we need to learn how to interpret appropriately and then channel them for our own highest good. As one of the quotes we just read says, even the unpleasant ones have a purpose. So let's talk about emotions for a few minutes and the role that they play in our lives, as well as some different perspectives about how to deal with them. The following is from a video that I watched years ago, on which Deepak Chopra was one of the featured speakers, and he had this to say about emotions. He said, one thing for sure is biologically, human beings are emotional creatures. Our cortical or rational brain is about 4 million years old. Our emotional brain, what we call our limbic brain, is 100 million years old. So when it comes to taking action, people never make rational decisions, even the smartest ones. We make an emotional decision and then we justify it through rational thought. Okay, so that was a big concept to get your head around. We're going to go into it. Does anyone remember, any of you remember that movie back from the 80s, maybe the 90s, but I believe it was the 80s, Moonstruck? And there's a little scene from that movie that is an extreme example of this line of thought. Nicolas Cage's character says to Cher's character, Loretta, I love you. Not like they told you love is, and I didn't know this either, but love doesn't make things nice. It ruins everything. It breaks your heart. It makes things a mess. We aren't here to make things perfect. The snowflakes are perfect. The stars are perfect, but not us. We are here to ruin ourselves and to break our hearts and love the wrong people and die. End scene. So, now when I was in my late teens and early 20s, which is when this movie came out, I thought this was such a romantic statement and concept. Besides being emotional, humans are pretty dramatic creatures too. So me thinking this statement that we're just here to ruin ourselves and break our hearts and love the wrong people, or in other words, people who are wrong for us and die, me thinking that was romantic, according to Deepak Chopra, was just my attempt to rationalize an overly emotional and probably poor choice of boyfriends I had at the time. I made an emotional decision, all heart and no head, no balance, and then I tried to justify it by saying, well, that's what romance is, okay? That's how it's supposed to be. That's why they call it being madly in love, right? No. Okay. But who remembers Cher's character's response to him, okay? Her character, Loretta, just stares at him for a minute, and then she slaps him in the face and says, snap out of it. She was the opposite extreme, all reason and rationality, all head and no heart. Loretta is more like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, who, not being a human, but a Vulcan, had some very accurate observations of human behavior. Mr. Spock says, may I say that I have not thoroughly enjoyed serving with humans. I find their illogical and foolish emotions a constant irritant. So there you see each end of the spectrum and the perspectives that go with each. One being that the whole reason we're here is just to be guided blindly by our emotions and our passions, which is a very messy proposition. And the other being that our purpose should be to downplay or overcome or completely conquer or eliminate our emotions because they are so illogical and foolish. And as always, what we should be shooting for is somewhere right in the middle of that spectrum. The perfect balance between logic and instinct, heart and head, cortical brain and limbic brain. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, how best to do that. But for now, let's go back to Deepak Chopra talking about emotions. He was talking about humans being emotional beings and how we make decisions based on our emotions, and then we use our rational brains to justify our emotional decisions. And he's not really making a judgment here about that being right or wrong. He's just making an observation about human nature as it is right now at this point in history and in our evolution. So he says, so it's very important to know that even though we pretend to be rational creatures, we are always bristling with emotion. And because of this, most of our actions come from some emotional surge. There is a popular saying, love without action is irrelevant, but action without love is meaningless. So the most important thing is to find that perfect balance. Okay, so the point Deepak Chopra is trying to make here is that we have our cortical brain that's only about 4 million years old, where our rational thought comes from, and we have our limbic brain, which is where our emotions come from, which is 100 million years old, and therefore it's been with our species for a lot longer. So when it comes to making decisions and taking action, that's still our go-to system. But the fact is, we need both. That's why we evolved a cortical brain, because we needed it. Going back to the quote I just said, love without action, okay, if all we have is love, it's meaningless. But action without love is, no. Love without action is irrelevant, but action without love is meaningless. So he also said that we need to figure out a way to find that balance. I'm going to propose to you today that one of the ways we can do this is through prayer. And the minute I say that word, prayer, we all have some sort of emotional reaction. Some of us who have had good experiences with feeling like our prayers have been answered and prayer has been an effective tool for us over the years will say, yay, prayer. But then others of us, when we hear that word, we say, ugh, boring. Or we immediately start to think of all the times that we feel our prayers have gone nowhere. And again, that is all in the emotional realm. But I'm not talking about our traditional view of prayer, which is asking a Santa Claus-like figure to that's far, far away, somewhere up in the sky, to give us things or fix things for us or to get us out of sticky situations. For the most part, we still have a very antiquated idea of what prayer is. But I came across a book several years back that I've shared with you from before called The Dynamic Laws of Prayer by Catherine Ponder that paints a very different picture of what prayer can be that I want to read from now. Maybe it will help us shift our paradigm a bit about prayer. I talked about this 3-step process of prayer that she presents in this book a few weeks ago on Sunday morning. Step 1 is purification, which is actually forgiveness of others as well as of yourself. And this clears out all the negative stuff that is blocking your emotional and spiritual channel so that the energy of God can now move through freely and that you can receive your answer. Okay, that just makes logical sense. If you're trying to get something from one place to another, the conduit it moves through has to be clear. Step 2 is illumination, or what the book calls illuminative guidance. And here's an example that the book gives of that step in the process. In order to receive illuminative guidance, affirm the divine idea by saying, I am a divine idea in the mind of God, and I am now guided into my true place. I let go of everything and everyone that is no longer a part of the divine plan in my life. I now expand quickly into the divine plan of my life where all conditions are permanently perfect. Okay, so that sounds a lot like that part in our prayer of surrender when we say, Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. And we could also add who you will. And take from me what you will. Now, the carry me where you will and the bring to me what you will are much easier than the take from me what you will part. That's the part that is the hardest to deal with sometimes. We say we want to be in the mind of Christ and that we want help and guidance from our Christ nature, our higher self, about what to do to be happier and more fulfilled and more at peace. But then when the illumination comes and says, okay, this thing, this circumstance, or this person needs to be taken away in order for you to move forward, we don't like it. But that is just as much a part of being surrendered as the rest of it. It's just as much as a part as where we're carried, what's brought to us, and what is awakened in us. That take from us part is there as well. And in this illumination step, we are often shown what needs to go in order for us to expand and grow and be on our most productive path. Now, we don't have to let it go, okay? It's always our choice. But we're not going to move any closer to the last step of answered prayer, which is union with God and the God nature within us, until we complete step 2 and do what we've been guided to do. Now, before we move on to step 3, I want to expand a bit more on what I talked about this past Sunday, the symbolism of the cross as it relates to our free will and choosing to either get into alignment with divine will, with God's will, or not. Symbolically, the vertical line of the cross represents divine will, and the horizontal line represents our human free will. They meet in the middle, which is where our heart is, which we've just been told by Deepak Chopra is the place where we make all of our decisions anyway, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So once we have asked for divine guidance, which is what prayer is, and then it has been illuminated for us, we can still choose to do it our own way. Okay, we can still hang on to our will, but that's when we encounter the painful death of the cross. Once we surrender to divine will, then there's no more friction. You know how people sometimes will use that gesture to mean conflict or stop, or, it's not going any further? Well, think about that's the cross. But once you shift into divine will, okay, there's just one single path going upward. There is no more of this. You and God and your will and God's will have become one. But not because God's will has changed or because we finally just begged long enough and hard enough that he changed his mind about a situation and came around to our way of thinking. Okay, that vertical line is never going to come down to your vibration on the horizontal line. It's just not going to happen. Again, we don't have to choose to say, thy will be done. We can hang on to our will as long as we want to, but it's going to be painful. Another visual that came to me is if you're out in the ocean, if your ship has wrecked and you're on the open sea, you know how sometimes they'll show a person hanging on to a plank? Okay, well, if you're hanging on to a plank out in the ocean, just surviving, that's that horizontal plank. But if someone comes along to take you up out of that circumstance you don't want to be in, what is the direction of whatever they hand you? If it's their hand, or if it's a rope, or if it's a plank, it's going vertical. So that's another good little key to remember that, yeah, you can hang on to your will, but it's only going to let you float and survive. If you want to go upwards, you have to get in line with the vertical will of God. All right, there's so much symbolism in that. On to step 3 now. Step 3, and finally, is union. I'm going to quote again now from the book. Psychologists tell us that we develop whatever we concentrate our attention upon. If you turn your attention upon your innate divinity, the Christ mind within, you will begin to awaken. Once this happens, you gain access to universal wisdom and universal good. And I want to add here that once we see that universal wisdom and goodness, and we understand that that's what's best for us anyway, then it's no problem to change your will. I read in a book once where the author basically asked the question, why are we so afraid to let go of our plan, of our will, and accept God's? What would he possibly ever ask us to do or to give up or direction to go in that would not be the best for us? So that's when our theology comes into play. God's not trying to trick us, okay? But what do you believe about God? Do you believe that God, source, the universe, is basically good? Or have these descriptions of a trickster devil who is always out to trick you and get one over on you crept in to your conditional belief system so that you're confused about those two entities, okay? You're no longer in the oneness that it is a good God. It's, no, there's a part of God that is a trickster that wants to trip me up. So this is why our theology matters. Back to the book. You can greatly accelerate the awakening of the Christ mind within you by using affirmations that identify you with the Christ. Recognizing and calling on the Christ mind through repeated affirmations is especially powerful in the face of "it can't be done" or so-called impossible situations. Calling on the Christ mind seems to release a super wisdom, a tremendous executive power that sweeps through situations to make the impossible possible. Do this by affirming, the Christ mind is producing perfect results here and now. I am letting the Christ mind think through me now. I know, I remember, I understand. I express the truth perfectly in this situation now. Affirm this, and the tide will turn. Consciously centering your mind with repeated affirmations of the Christ mind opens a channel of intelligent communication with the silent forces at the depths of your being, where new thoughts, words, and wisdom flow forth, and where entirely new sources of power are developed in you. So that's the end of the information from the book. And that's a little bit different view of prayer than we have traditionally been taught, isn't it? I had never heard it explained like that before in these 3 steps. Purification, which is basically forgiveness and clearing ourselves of our negative stuff that has become a block. Illumination, or surrendering, when surrendering whatever it is that we're being shown, and allowing Spirit to carry us, bring to us, take from us, awaken in us what we need in order to move forward and have a positive result. And 3, union, the union between us and the Christ mind within us by focusing our attention on our innate divinity and Christ likeness, which allows us to say, not my will, not my small, personal, unconnected to source will where I see myself as separate, not that will, but thine be done. And that's how we shift that horizontal bar of the cross into alignment with the vertical. That is what allows us to say, I am God. If you're still operating here in your personal separate will, you can't say that. You have to shift up into the vertical will of God before you can say, I am God. You have to connect with the divinity's in there, but you have to connect with it. So that's a very different paradigm from just praying purely out of our emotion, out of our pain, our despair, or our fear, begging God to change something. This paradigm is all about God changing us and making us ready to receive divine wisdom for our lives. Prayer is all about getting our consciousness to a high enough level that the divine wisdom and energy can flow freely through us and begin creating as us. It shows us our own divinity. So we'll never look at prayer in quite the same way again, will we? I want to end with this. Some of those affirmations or prayers that I read spoke about perfection, the perfection of the situation. And one even described the divine plan as one that was permanently perfect. Now, that is a hard concept for us imperfect humans to grasp, especially given the fact that for most of our lives, the religions that we have followed have focused mainly on our imperfections, constantly reminding us of them rather than focusing on the perfection of the Christ nature that is also inside of us. Coincidentally, that's what we're talking about on Wednesday nights, the gift that our imperfection is, okay? It is a gift, but we have to see it as that and use it to come into our perfection. So all of you know that one of my very favorite quotes that I say all the time is, the world is perfect. There are just a lot of people in it having bad conversations. So yes, exactly. The world, as God created it, is perfect. It's only our perception that makes it imperfect, and the fact that we choose to focus on the negative that we ourselves have created with our emotions. Most of the conversations we're having with each other, with ourselves, and even with God through what we've previously and traditionally called prayer are what is negative and imperfect. But underneath all of those bad conversations full of unforgiveness and blockages and negative stuff and out of control emotions, underneath all of that, there's still a perfect world because everything God created is perfect. So it's not really the world that needs changing, but rather the conversations we're having. Again, with each other, with ourselves, and with God through the way that we pray. Once the conversation changes, the perfect world that has always been is revealed to us in all its perfection. So I want to encourage you today to change the conversation. And if you're still hanging on to any part of that old traditional view of prayer as changing God's mind or begging Him for things, let that go. Let's purify, forgive ourselves, others, so that we clear our channel of all negativity, so that we can receive illumination from our own higher nature, and then come into union with the Christ mind, into alignment with divine will, which is the truest meaning of what prayer really is. And in doing that on a regular basis, we begin to bring together our head and our heart, our emotion and our rationality. And we reach the perfect balance that gives meaning to our action and purpose to our love. If we choose not to do this, we're just dead men walking, basically. And it's not that death is bad in and of itself, because it's not the end. It's only bad when we think of it as the end. And we do tend to think of it that way, but that's an incomplete thought born out of our linear thinking mind. Our eternal mind is a circle where death is only half of the equation. It's only one step in the process. Sometimes it's necessary, again, using Jesus as our role model, he had to die. But that next step that always follows death, that we so often forget about, is resurrection. I'm going to read now about that process, again from the video that I watched called Mythic Journeys. The guy said, most adults are dragging the corpse of their former life around with them. Aspects of their life that no longer have any vitality, but they can't seem to let go of them. The problem is, if you don't get rid of the corpses of the past, there's no room for the vitality of the present to enter. So that's step one of our prayer process, purification, letting everything that's old and dead fall away. Forgive it all, and as the old timers used to say, leave it at the altar. Leave it there. Leave your burdens, give your burdens to the Lord and leave them there. Change requires a brush with death and getting rid of the old, just as a snake has to shed its skin every once in a while. An old saying is, people who are not familiar with death don't know much about life. The idea of death makes life important, but our modern culture doesn't do a very good job of addressing death. Okay, I want to just put in right here, when it said that the idea of death makes life important. Think about that song that we talk about sometimes that my brother talks about, Live Like You Were Dying. If you're told you only have a certain amount of time left, you live your life a little bit differently. Everything seems, you get rid of everything that's not absolutely vital and important to you, and you concentrate on everything that is important. So what this is saying is, why don't we just live like that all the time? Okay, back to the video. I've talked to large groups of young people before and have asked the question, how many of you have contemplated suicide? And all or most of the hands go up, and I say, guess what? Everybody thinks about suicide, and most of us think about it even when we're young. But that doesn't mean you're supposed to die young. It just means you're old enough now that you realize part of you needs to die so you can have a bigger life, so you can shed that old skin just like the snake and grow one that fits a bigger you. When you feel this way, you think all of you needs to die because you don't have much life experience yet. But all you need to do is figure out which part of you needs to die and throw that part off the bridge, and then the rest of you crosses the bridge and keeps going. Okay, I love the symbolism he uses here of someone walking out onto a bridge intending to throw themselves off and commit suicide, but when they get there, they realize that only part of them needs to be thrown off. And so they throw that part off, and that's the part of them that dies. And then they, their ego, their small ideas about themselves, they're separated from God's self. That's what they throw off and let die. And then the rest of them walks across the bridge and continues on with their life with a bigger container for the divine part of themselves. Love that. Death is the most creative act of the soul, because every death is followed by a resurrection. That old, emotionally driven limbic system can lead us to the despair even of not wanting to live anymore. And we see here that's actually not an incorrect impulse. But like so many other things we've come to believe, it's just incomplete. When our emotions are out of control to that degree, they are signaling us that something indeed does need to die. But it's not all of us. It's just that part or those parts of us that are no longer serving our highest good. Those parts of us that we have outgrown. That skin that we need to shed so that a better version of us can be revealed. I heard someone say the other day, they spelled out the word pain. And they said all pain, now we talked earlier about learning to interpret your emotions. So pain is an emotion, and this is how we need to interpret it. Pay attention inside now. So that's all pain. Pain is signaling you something's wrong, so turn within, okay? painful emotions are just a signal. And when we feel them, it just means we need to stop and listen to what they're telling us and what we need to change or let go of. Using our emotions to help us figure out how to change the conversations we're having, specifically through the way we pray or communicate with God, is the first step to our resurrection. So are you beginning to see now how distracting it is when we think we have to pray about all these external conditions and issues that are going on in the world or in our personal lives? We think we have to pray for world peace, and we think we have to pray for God to stop all of the war. We have to pray for the abused children and the people who are being sex trafficked. We have to pray for the economy. We have to pray for our political leaders and our family members who are acting crazy, and on and on and on. That is a never-ending list, as well as a no-win proposition, which is exhausting and only leaves us depressed with no energy to live our own lives. But you have the free will to choose to live that way if you want to. But I'd like to offer you, or remind you rather, of a visual that I gave you a while back, that the outer world, everything that's going on in our outer world, is just a mirror of our collective inner thoughts. Okay, so if that's something you believe, then follow my logic here. If you see something in the mirror that you think is wrong or bad or needs to be changed or altered in some way, where does the change need to occur? Okay, you don't reach toward the mirror to clean something off your face or to get your hair back into place, because you realize it's just a reflection. You can wipe that mirror all day long and your hair will still be out of place and the dirt will still be on your face. Nothing changes in the mirror until you change it on or in you. So, as I said just a few weeks ago, no matter what the issue is, there is really only one valid and effective prayer, and that is, make me new. Because peace, harmony, love, abundance, joy, all of it begins within. Amen? Amen. Please join us tomorrow night at 6:30 for our continuing Wednesday night series, The Gift of Imperfections. And we will see you. It was so wonderful to see so many of you this Sunday in person. I love seeing you face to face. Come join us if you feel inclined to do so. We would love to see you. Be at peace. Until next week, I love you. Bye.